We all have our share of problems. Would you agree? Challenges, difficulties, whatever they're called, issues. They like to call them issues today. And each of us have our own way of dealing with problems, which often goes back to what we learned from attitudes of our parents, from our teachers, from life experience. Many people initially address an issue through denial, which means not address it, by minimizing or ignoring. And in some circumstances, some situations, that may even work. When things don't work that way, and you're forced to deal with things, many of us avoid confrontations, even though there may be grave consequences or any consequences. But then when you're really forced to deal with something, then again, we have a whole range of methods that we use. For example, on just a basic level, there's a symptomatic called the remedial approach. You deal with the symptoms, and you try to mitigate them, as they say. What do? For example, God forbid, somebody has a bleeding wound, put on a Band-Aid, the Band-Aid effect. If you have a headache, you take an aspirin, a Tylenol, Advil, whatever it may be. So these are dealing with the symptoms, and in some circumstance, some situation, that again works, because it's not a serious issue. But then there are deeper rooted problems where a symptomatic or remedial approach won't work, and you need to get to the core of an issue. And that's when it's repeated and you realize just a superficial or a cosmetic remedy is not going to work. So we call it a root core, we could even call it preventive medicine in a way, which of course is much more long-term, because you try to get to the root of the issue instead of dealing with the symptoms. It's the classic joke, which, as many jokes in psychology today, come from Chelem. I don't know if you know this, but in Jewish lore we have Chelem stories. Chelem was a town in Poland, in Europe, where a lot of wise people lived, but the neighbors, who were resentful of them, I guess, created this Chelem lore, these stories of the stupid people of Chelem, like the dumb jokes. But they have very many insights into psychological insights, and there are many, many of them. I'll just share one classic. Is a guy's looking for his keys at night. He lost his keys, his car keys, whatever. He's looking. A neighbor comes by and says, "Let me help you look." So of course you want to retrace the steps, like, where did you lose them? So he points 100 yards away, that's where he lost them. So why are you searching here? He says, because here's where the light is shining. This is a classic, which really means that we look at problems where it's easy to look. We don't really necessarily want to look at places that are uncomfortable. And just to give you a very basic example, I deal with this counseling people and advising and so on. Very rarely, I would say 99%, when people tell you they have a problem, and I'm not talking about a cosmetic or superficial problem. It's rarely the problem that people really say. People describe what's irking them and what's bothering them, but it's rarely the real root of the problem. It's the symptoms of the problem. Someone say, my marriage isn't working. At work, my job, people, and I can't get along with people. I can't find my soulmate. All the different things. These are symptoms. The root is far more complicated. So how do you indeed try to find a deeper cause for something that seems to be persistent? Again, if you can solve something short term with a remedial approach, by all means. But when you see that there's a pattern, a routine, and you just can't get out of the rut, what do you do? So as an objective party, which I play the role, or any therapist or counselor or coach may play, what you need to do is really explore, because you don't know. So how do you figure out what's going on in someone's unconscious that's invisible, that they themselves not even aware of, let alone you're not aware of, because you don't know them? So you do, I use an example that's a very good example in how you probe. Take an imaginary wall, a wall that's shrouded in darkness, and you can't go over and approach the wall, and you can't shine a light on it. Yet you want to know what this wall looks like. Is there any way for you to do that without approaching it, without shining a light? So there is a way. You take a rubber ball and you bounce it on the wall. So you can't approach it, but you can bounce the ball, and the ball bounces back. If it bounces back straight, so you know that part of the wall is a straight part. If it bounces back to the right, you know there must be a left indentation. It bounces back to the left, a right indentation. And you keep bouncing it, what we call extrapolation, and you can get yourself almost a map of the wall but not directly, indirectly. It's somewhat like sonar works. Right? How does sonar work? They shoot powerful airwaves, sound waves, under the sea, and you see what bounces back. If it bounces back, and you can tell there's a submarine there. Or this is how whales communicate. I mean, sonar has a power, but you don't see it directly, you see it through what is born, like sonogram in a way. It's through sound waves or ear waves or light waves that we don't directly see it, but when you bounce something off, you can get the echo effect, so to speak. How it bounces back tells you much. This is, by the way, how they know that we have black holes. Einstein predicted in physics over 100 years ago that there are black holes. But a black hole is a paradox. Because why is it black? Because the light, the gravitational pull of the object is so powerful, it doesn't even let light escape. So how can we see it? So the way it's seen is by seeing objects near it being affected. When you see, for example, let's say suddenly you saw metal clips or other metal moving in this room, and you don't believe in ghosts, you'll realize there must be a magnetic field or a very strong magnet that is exerting power, and that's why. So, for example, if I saw something metal moving, it could be a very strong magnet, and you may not see that magnet. This is a second way, another way of discovering deeper issues. So how does that apply to the psychological model? It applies the following. It applies as follows. You talk to someone, and you start, like let's just a doctor would do. Let's say you have a little pain in your knee, or a pain in your tooth, or whatever it may be. So a good doctor, what they do is they begin to touch and feel, and they try to eliminate by process of elimination what can be the issue. And as they get closer, they say, "Now, how does that feel? How does that feel?" And suddenly you start yelling, and you realize there must be a raw nerve there. So psychologically, the same is true. You bounce a ball when you talk to someone, and you're trained. What you're really doing is probing by talking about it. Let's talk about your father. Let's talk about your mother. Let's talk about your childhood. Let's talk about your education. Let's talk about your teen years, your college years, whatever it may be. And what happens is the reaction people give you to each of these items is like the ball bouncing back, and you see. And you could see sometimes, for example, many people say, "No, I don't want to talk about my mother. My mother, everything is fine with my mother. Let's move on." So you immediately know there's a raw nerve there. Now, obviously, you don't want to hurt anyone. You're not looking to assault their psyche in any way. If someone's uncomfortable, obviously you respect it. But it tells you a lot. Like if someone says, "No, that area we don't need to go to." These are examples where the ball is bouncing back and telling you there's something going on. It's a sign of something else, something deeper that's taking place. The point I'm making here is that in looking for the root of issues and problems, there are methods to be used. Now, this is what objective people can do. Subjectively, it's very hard to bounce the ball back on your own psyche because you're too blinded, and we have blind spots. There's the other, just as I gave you the example with the Chelm story with the light shining. So most of us don't go where the real problem is because it's too uncomfortable. Who wants to go to an uncomfortable place? It's like these two Jews go to a foot doctor. They both have a pain in the same area. And one goes into the doctor, the other one's waiting in the waiting room. And he hears his friend yelling, because the doctor obviously was testing and seeing what's going on. He starts yelling. So then he finally comes out and he says, "Wow, that was very painful," the friend says. "And I'll wait for you. I'll wait for you in the waiting room. Let's see what happens with you." The doctor gave me some suggestions. Anyway, the second guy goes in, and the guy is waiting in the waiting room is waiting for him to start yelling and screaming too, because they have the similar sciatica problem, whatever it was. And it's quiet. And he's very surprised. He says, "I know, my friend, it's not so easy to control. It's painful." Anyway, the guy comes out from the doctor and he's smiling. And he says, "What happened? You have the same pain, same leg. What happened?" He says, "I showed him the other leg." Of course, which is what many of us do. I know it sounds ridiculous, but very often we don't want to go where it's uncomfortable. And therefore, we create our own narrative, like saying this is not really the place, it's something else and something else. Point being is we all have ways how we deal or don't deal with problems. And some of them are very bizarre, and some of them are actually humorous, if it weren't happening to yourself, and if there were no unfortunate consequences. But we all have our ways. As I said, denial is always the first choice for most people, because why do you need to enter into, rock the boat, so to speak? If that doesn't work, then people go and begin to find different ways of avoiding. And then there's, as I said, symptomatic approaches, which you deal with symptoms. And of course, the deepest way that we know is dealing with the roots. When life is really not working, or it's a really difficult challenge, at some point, and this is why they say you have to hit rock bottom. Why do you have to hit rock bottom? Every one of us wants to be healthy. Why does an addict or anyone dealing with a very powerful force in their lives, why do they need to hit rock bottom? Because human beings avoid dealing with difficult and uncomfortable things. That's the nature of the beast. So therefore, rock bottom means you come to a point where you realize there's no way around this. When the pain and the discomfort of having to deal with it is more painful than the discomfort of not having to deal with it, that's when you do something. Which is why many of us don't really wake up until something's not working. You very rarely will find people, when everything is going well, that they really address issues. We address issues usually when there's a crack. So you lose a job, there's a loss, there's a trauma, God forbid, a divorce, a death. Things are suddenly, the rug is pulled out from under you, your comfort zones are shaken up. That's usually when we do something. And even then, many of us still avoid and are not solving the issues. And I'm not saying this to depress anyone. I'm just trying to be, it's an observation based on life experience, and you can all know where you fit in. Maybe you do know, maybe you don't know. But all of us will have this, I include myself. We have times where we avoid. And frankly, as I said, if you can get away with certain things, not having to go dig, I don't think we have to go dig for everything. Someone just asked me the other day, do you feel that when someone their life is challenged, do they need to go back to their childhood and regress all the way back and find out every form of abuse and every detail that happened in your entire life? Absolutely not. The only reason you may need to go deeper is when when you can't resolve it any other way. It's like anything in life. If you can deal with it in the immediate, or you can deal with it without going that deep, obviously think of it like surgery. There's no reason to have deep internal and intrusive surgery if you can resolve it with less intrusion, obviously. It's only when you have no choice. So in solving problems, we all have our methods. Obviously, I should mention, just for the record, there's also the hypochondriac, where every superficial detail becomes, like, who knows, life-threatening. There's also that extreme. But I don't want to really go there. That's another discussion. The point being is we all have ways to deal with problems. And what I want to address in this class, something that recently I've come upon, and it's based on a very powerful line of a Hasidic master and mystic whose birthday was actually yesterday. And therefore, I felt that it was appropriate to talk about a new way to solve problems. It's a new way, as you'll see, in comparing it to other ways that are out there. I think this can introduce a new approach, at least for most of us, and hopefully can really help you tackle and address issues that you may have till this day still not resolved, or things that may come up with this new approach to things. So what I've so far laid out is there's the denial approach, which of course is not dealing with something. There's dealing with something on a symptomatic level, and there's dealing with something with a root level, which of course everyone would think that's like the best. You get the root. But there's another way, a fourth way, we'll call it. And I know I'm considering denial as a method. I know it's not really a method, but I will say one thing in defense of denial. Even though everyone thinks of denial as a negative, it has actually a positive side to it. Sometimes we go into denial, it's a way of preserving and keeping our sanity. If we were always overwhelmed by any trauma, without any minimizing, it can sometimes be too much for us. So when people, for example, go through real trauma, so it's known and documented, there's an initial stage of denial. That they do not believe it. And everyone thinks, no, you got to make them believe it. It's not true. Sometimes for the system, it's too shocking to hear something, and you need the time to be able to absorb it. So denial actually can work on our benefits, as long as it's not an extreme benefit, in the sense that we have a certain way of minimizing, buffering, and in some way diminishing the impact, so we can slowly acclimate ourselves to that fact. I remember when my father passed away, coming close to his 11th yahrzeit 11 years ago. So this was, it was probably the most impactful event in my life, in pure emotional impact. My father, he was 70 years old. It's not like, it's relatively young today, but it was also not young, God forbid, in the 40s or 30s, you hear real tragedies. But nevertheless, a death is a death. and you should all be protected from any death. But you lose a father at 70, at 80, at 90, at 100. It's still a death. It's still your father, and especially if you had a loving relationship with him. And everyone has a relationship with a father, and a father goes back all the way into your deepest unconscious before you even remember. It was your father and your mother that held you and that nurtured you. So I remember, and being someone that has consoled many people, and someone that tries to be a student of human condition, I looked at myself. I was studying myself as I went through it, and I saw all those stages. I saw stages where you're completely in shock because there's an element of simply impossible to fathom. That suddenly you see a man that you knew for so many years, alive, with all the sparkle in his eyes and all his passion and everything. Then suddenly you just see a body, which I saw as the oldest son. I was there, and suddenly the soul is gone. The life force is gone. Very hard to understand what that means. The thoughts that came to me, and it's not really something that you can philosophize about, something you can start rationalizing. It's not a scientific thing. There's just an emotional impact that you just need to absorb. I wrote several pretty raw articles actually at that point, because I wanted to document in a way my feelings. It was a catharsis for me to write, and it's not trying to explain. Some things you don't need to explain. In a way, 2 times in one's life, the door opens up between 2 worlds. Upon birth, when the womb opens and a beautiful child emerges into this world, and the second time upon death, when the earth opens up and receives back its the body. And you realize at that moment that there's another reality that it's hard to really point your finger to. And I remember after the Shiva, after we were sitting Shiva for my father, which is 7 days of mourning, and wisdom of that is its own discussion of buffering you and protecting you from the shock and so on. So there's a custom after you get up from a Shiva, you take a walk. It's the first time you're really seeing daylight. I mean, you've seen daylight, but I mean to say, going back to your routine. So I remember I was walking with my sister, my younger sister. I'm the oldest of 5 siblings, and I was saying to her, we didn't even need words because we had just experienced the same. And I said, "Do you think we will go back to regular life?" And then it was a rhetorical question. I said, "I have no doubt it'll take a few days, and then the door closes back, and then you go back to life." But there are things that you experience. I mean, I don't want to compare it to near-death experiences because it wasn't our death. But nevertheless, there are experiences that you realize that there's something beyond, there's something that is not fathomable, not rational in our understanding. And it humbles you, and you accept it, just like birth. There's no one on earth, not the greatest atheist, that is not touched by the magic of birth, a child being born. Because you just think about it. Where did it come from? Conception, a cell. And then suddenly, pop, here we are, going to therapy with all our neurosis and all our mishigas and everything, the whole thing. Out of where, And we're like this whole complicated individual in a 5-6 foot frame, 100, 150 pounds. I don't want to go higher than that, And here we are. Where did it come from? And I mean, nobody can explain it. Obviously, we have a scientific process, and it's the same thing with the seed in the ground that yields a beautiful tree. But it's equally magical. My point is not everything has to be rationalized and minimized. Sometimes there's a thing called something awesome. It's beautiful to have something awesome. Just like you go watch the 7 Wonders, there's awesome. You hear beautiful music, it transports you to another place and time, or you fall in love. There's nothing wrong with having things that are not completely part of a mathematical equation. Why am I saying this? Is because when you're dealing with challenges and problems, obviously all this comes to the surface. So when things are going well, basically the surface level of your life is sufficient. And your comfort zones are very powerful. The power of inertia, the power of the status quo, the power of things are just fine. As people say, hey, things are fine. But then when suddenly something shakes you up, like in this case I'm mentioning my father's death, you're forced to go to a place that is not comfortable at all. And you don't become a weaker person necessarily, you become a greater person if you know how to embrace it and you approach it in a healthy way. So in addressing issues and challenges and difficulties, which is what we're talking about, as I mentioned, there are many ways we go about it. And as I said, I want to submit and suggest a way that maybe is novel and revolutionary even, and you may not have heard of. As I said, I'm deriving it from a statement made by, and I'll describe him in a few moments, by someone whose birthday was yesterday, a great mystic and Hasidic and spiritual leader, whose name is Rabbi Shmuel, the fourth Chabad Rebbe. My teacher, my mentor, was the seventh Chabad Rebbe, just in the same dynasty. So I didn't know this man. This man lived in the years when did he was born in, I believe it is 1838, and passed away in the year 18. No, I'm sorry. 1883. Okay, just for the historical record. So basically a 19th century leader. And he lived in Russia, in what's called today maybe White Russia, Belarus, or that area, in a town called Lubavitch. There's a little town there. And he was, as I said, a great mystic teacher, left us a lot of teachings. And there's an interesting statement that he made, which when you really analyze it, can, as I said, offer us an approach to life that can, to modern life today and our challenges and our difficulties. So the introduction that I gave, I'll tell you what that line is. And that line is, it's a Yiddish expression. Anybody knows Yiddish? Yeah. Okay. I'll say it in Yiddish anyway, so it may sound like a nice ring. It's like a song. So even if you don't understand it, it has a certain ring to it. Then I'll translate it, obviously. So he says, the Welt sagt, which means the world says, conventional wisdom would dictate, that when you can't, when you can't go below, you go above. Meaning when you're trying to get into somewhere, let's say, and you can't get in, so the first thing you do is you try to go under the barriers, so to speak, right? But when you can't go under, you go over the barrier. That's the expression. And then he says, I say, however, that you should in the first place go over the barrier, not under. That's his expression. Now, it may sound very simplistic. However, when you start thinking about it and you know the context, it's a whole discussion. You know, there's a Talmudic story that tells about a certain sage who says that there was once a child that got the best of me. And he tells the story that he was once traveling to a city, and he came to a fork in the road, crossroads, and he didn't know which way to go to the city he's trying to. So he asked the little boy that was there, a young student, a young child, and the child said to him, this is the short and long road, and this is the long and short road. So one path is long and short, and one is short and long. So to him, the short and long sounded shorter, so he decided to take that path. And he traveled, and he saw the city ahead, but surrounded between the road till the city was surrounded with all kinds of overgrowth and pastures and trees, and he realized he would not be able to make it. So he went back to the crossroad and he said to the boy, he said to him, you told me it's a short road. He said, I said short, but long. And this is the long but short, which is longer in miles or in kilometers or whatever, but there's no path, there's no impediments in the way. So if you had two paths in front of you, one was a half a mile, one was 5 miles. You know, your GPS would give you the two options, and most of us, of course, would choose the short one, unless you take in consideration the traffic or the impediments. So it may be right there, but you can't get there because there are too many impediments. What does this mean on a psychological or emotional level? And we always have different approaches to situations. Now, most of us would gravitate to the approach that is a short-long, because it sounds shorter. So you may find solutions, quick solutions, a quick fix, but then time passes and you realize, hey, 1 second, didn't really work. As a matter of fact, it may even be detrimental because you thought that it worked, and meanwhile you lost a lot of time. So you go back and you have to realize, you know what, maybe I need to take the other approach, which is take your time, resolve the issue, but once you do, it's a short path because the rest is a clear journey. And this is, again, different approaches that we take, and the human being is such that we usually do not look for the comprehensive approach. We look for the quick approach. People call it a quick fix. You know, press the button, especially today. In our technological age, we've deluded ourselves into thinking, all you got to do is press a button. You can sit in your basement, in your house, and literally press buttons, and you'll have Amazon within an hour deliver anything you want. whether it's at Amazon, some other company, whatever it may be. And literally anything. You can get any fruit in season, out of season. That's how it is, especially in New York. You don't want to go, you could just go downstairs and you'll find a store within walking distance. So this is a beautiful technological advancement. But what does it do for us when it comes to real things? Let's talk about love. Can you also press a button and get love delivered within a half hour? And what about truth? And what about soul? And what about meaning in life? The truth is, the biggest things in life, the most important things, the fundamental, and we'll call them the timeless, the permanent things in life, technology does nothing for that. Have you seen technology make relationships better? Yes, if you love someone, you have an easier way to send them a love note by email or some other way through social media. But that's only if you love them. The technology is not going to make you love them. It's just a tool that you can reach someone quicker. As a matter of fact, some argue that the whole technology is actually undermining relationships. You know, some cynics say the whole social media was created by people who are antisocial. If you look at them, and I've met quite a few, they are antisocial. They've created a whole thing. He could have friends that you never meet. How do you like that? Facebook friends, for example. So with all its benefits, it also creates a depersonalization and an illusion that we're in control. But we're not in control when it comes to real matters. And this is not by any means a dismissal of technology's developments. It's like what they always said, I'm a pre-internet guy. What I mean by that is I once used a typewriter for years, typing my writings. And then I transitioned into a word processor. And then the fax was discovered. And then later came a BBS, which probably most of you have never heard of, a bulletin board system, which was pre-web. And then in the 90s, 94, 95, the web emerged, internet. And today that's a given. All of you are young men and women here, so you probably don't remember this prehistoric dinosaur age, but there was once a world where there was just a typewriter. And we survived, I must say. And now, thank God, I've been able to adapt technology. I don't see it as some type of, some people find it as some type of imposition. On the contrary, my work technology improved our work. We sped things up. There's no question using a typewriter. You had to type it again and again. There was whiteout and all that type of stuff. But today, you can, a word processor, you don't have to retype anything. You can keep editing the same document, just on a very basic level. So, but at the same time, I never deluded myself into thinking technology is the salvation of mankind. It did not emancipate the human beings. People who are miserable are still miserable. Maybe even more so, because misery loves company and it's all over advertised today. And people who are in love are still in love. As they would say then, and they still say it, when it comes to technology, is junk in, junk out. Garbage in, garbage out. If it's junk that you're putting in, that's the junk you're going to get out. If it's good things that you're putting in, the good things, yes, so can crunch numbers faster, you can communicate better, the efficiency is unbelievable, it's not even comparable, but it does not necessarily guarantee quality of life unless you have quality of life. And it's just a statement. If you do have it, then technology is a great tool to improve it, to enhance it, and so on. So, when it comes to the fundamentals of life that I just describing, these are things that you cannot go ahead and acquire, press a button. There's no short-term, long road. It's a long, short road. And the word long shouldn't perturb or disturb us. Long simply means it takes work. Anybody's ever sent you a bouquet of flowers? You ever think how these flowers grew? As much as we'd like this to happen, it doesn't work this way. You want a beautiful rose, you can't pull it out of the ground. You want its petals to open, you can't just force them open. I always share this, especially when dealing couple therapy. Tell people who really love each other, and especially women more than men even, but it's really both ways. You nurture someone. What you do is you nurture the flower. You nurture the earth, the soil. You water it. You fertilize it. You weed it. And then it emerges. The word emerge is a key word. There are things you can acquire, and there are things that emerge. And anything that emerges takes time. And just like a flower, there's a certain amount of time, you can't rush it. We live in a world where we have not seen, and most of us have not been exposed to agriculture. So we have no idea how much work goes in for grain to grow, that later will become processed and become the bread we eat. Because we just get the bread. You can get bread, fresh bread, 24/7, anywhere. But it grew somewhere. We've become somewhat disconnected from that natural element. And I'm saying it only for us to appreciate that real things in life are always going to take a longer road. But then it's short. Because then when the flower emerges, it's real. If you're forced it won't work. They tell that analogy, which is a beautiful, also sad analogy, of the caterpillar and the butterfly. So as you know, a caterpillar metamorphosizes into a butterfly through a process called the chrysalis, the cocoon. So you watch a caterpillar. At some point, it will get enclosed in this cocoon, and over a period of time, a metamorphosis takes place. And slowly the cocoon begins to open up, and instead of a caterpillar, now you have a beautiful monarch butterfly or any type of butterfly. So they tell the analogy that once a guy saw on a branch one of these cocoons beginning to crack open, and he sees the butterfly struggling to get out of the cocoon. So in his great moment of compassion, what does he do? Takes a knife or scissors and cuts open the cocoon to allow the butterfly to an easier exit, so it shouldn't have to struggle as much. Seemingly a very nice, compassionate act. Well, little did he know, as the butterfly comes out and he's waiting for the butterfly to take flight, and the butterfly sits there on the branch, never to fly. Because little did he know that the pressure of the butterfly struggling to get out of the cocoon, that pressure and exertion forces liquid and fluid to enter into the butterfly's wings that give it the what do you call it, what's it called, the wing lift, Tension not the tension, aerodynamic element that the wings could fly. And because he so-called protected the butterfly from this exertion, the fluids never went through the wings, and the butterfly remained grounded forever. Perfect example. The Talmud puts it this way, that a zayis, an olive, does not produce oil until you press it. And of course that analogy means that the pressure of life is what brings out the oil, that extracts the oil and the best within us. Now obviously pressure has many levels. But the thing that you don't need pressure in life, every one of us needs pressure. The question is how much pressure. Too much pressure can be overwhelming, can lead to anxiety, can lead to as I said, overwhelming forces that you can't deal with. But every one of us needs some pressure, a deadline, a competition, something that compels us to excel. You see excellence anywhere in the world, guaranteed, without a question. That's not just born talent. Somebody worked hard. Effort. Now there's all the rage of Duckworth's book, Grit, where she writes about that effort is more important than anything in life. Talent, skill, everything requires effort, exertion. You hear this from, I don't know if you like tennis. So who's the number one tennis? Djokovic from Serbia, right? So he was not number one for many years. Who was number one? Roger Federer, Nadal, and others. And what made him come number one is very clear, because these competitors were so good and he wanted to beat them. So he kept losing. And without them, he would never have taken it up a notch. So it's his losses to better players that caused them to become better than them. And if you don't have that type of opponent, where's the resistance? How do you know how strong you are until there's resistance? So all of us need that, and it's something we don't like. Like they say, experience is what you get when you don't like what you're getting. Because it comes from something you don't like. Or another way to put it, they say when a man with money meets a man with experience, the man with experience ends up with the money, and the man with the money ends up with the experience. Has this happened to you? If it happens too many times, maybe you should try a different profession. But this is common. So going back to the expression that I was referring to, so here's what it's like. When we look at any problem, our natural tendency is to figure out what can I do right now to get beyond this problem. Let's say you're on a journey and you're traveling and you see an impediment. What are you going to do? You're not going to take the high road. What you're going to do is try to get under the impediment, move around it, maneuver, because it's the easiest way to go. And in truth, that is a very good method. Why make yourself crazy and go a completely different approach when you can resolve it in a simpler way? Let's say you have a conflict with somebody at work or in any other given situation with a friend. So the easiest way to deal with it is, once you want to deal with it, is what, besides blaming everybody or yourself and someone else, is sitting down and figuring out, negotiating, okay, what's going on? Let's have a conversation and see what we can do. Which is really taking so-called the low road. So there's nothing wrong with that fundamentally, and in many cases it works. So that's why the expression, as that mystic, as that Rebbe put it, was that you can't go below, you go above. You try every possible way to go in a conventional way, but if that doesn't work, then you have no choice, and you have to take a new approach. Which makes total sense. And he says, I say you should initially take the high road. Now, what does that really mean, and how does that apply itself out in our own personal lives? So let's just take an example. If a little child came over to you right now and started kicking and scratching you, what would you do? I would like to believe that none of us would get down our arms and legs and kick and scratch back. Why? It's a little baby. They don't know better. What are you going to do? Reciprocate? They call you a name, you're going to call them names back. You're an adult. This is a child. That's what most of us would probably do. Maybe inside we may be a little insulted, especially if it's in public. But most of us will not resort and go, as I said, and become like that child. But what happens if an adult does that? If you're in public, or not even in public, in private, an adult insults you. Well, an adult is a different story. Why? Because an adult is someone that's more compatible to you. And why would you take an insult? So you may reciprocate by insulting back, or you may get indignant or something else, and you may say things that later you may regret. But now you're dealing with so-called an equal, so you deal with it differently. Now, why is it the child doesn't affect you like an adult? Very simple, because you see yourself as superior to the child. Now, I don't mean in an arrogant way. The child's a child, doesn't know better. You don't see yourself as an equal. If you did see yourself as an equal, you probably would reciprocate. And I'm sure there are adults that maybe would go back on their arms and knees and start kicking and scratching the other child, a little baby, maybe. What is the difference between the two attitudes? We'll say one is you're engaging with someone in battle, and the other one you're transcending the battle. That's really the distinction. Now, you see this as well now among adults. There are two adults who may experience the same painful experience. They both may have been humiliated, let's say. Or they both may have been in a very trying and difficult circumstance. And you see they react differently. Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man in Search of Meaning, based on and developed a whole psychology called logotherapy based on his observations in the concentration camps during World War II, where he saw that people, specifically religious Jews, though they suffered equally to their colleagues and to others in the camps, their attitudes were different. And they were more resilient. And he was fascinated why. They didn't suffer less, they were not more denial, they did not blame it on God, they had some strength that others did not have. And he developed exactly that as opposed to Freudian id and sexual urges, or the pleasure principle. He developed that meaning is the single most important thing in a person's life. And when a person has meaning, or the words of Nietzsche is, if you know why, you can deal with the what. If you know why you're here and there's purpose to it, you can deal with any what. If you don't know why, then everything can shake you. So if you're on a journey and there's a destination in your mind, you know you need to get to that destination. And then in the middle of the journey, suddenly it's aborted in ways that you did not expect, in ways that completely throw you. but you have a destination in mind. So you'll have the fight in you to forge ahead. Let's say you're traveling, you just a nice vacation, no destination in mind, and you don't have any real focus or purpose in this journey, and then there's an impediment. What are you going to do? You'll say, maybe I'll go back. Maybe I'll go somewhere else. There's nothing driving you because you don't have that sense of meaning and destiny to reach somewhere. So that idea of purpose and meaning there's a sense of destiny. There's a rendezvous with your own destiny, a rendezvous with some type of objective, whether it's God's plan, whether it's someone you love, whether it's something that is meaningful, that transcends the moments and the temporary moments, even the painful moments. That what gives you the power to transcend. So you see right there, same problem, two people resolve it differently. They both have the same problem. It's not like one is suffering more than the other. But there's two different approaches. One approach is, I'll go under, and if I can't go under, I'll try to go over. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. And another approach is that you're initially going in with a transcendent attitude. Now, the difference between these two people doesn't happen after the fact. They entered the concentration camp differently, so they exit differently. It's not like there, suddenly they developed a sense of purpose. It's only there, under those trying circumstances, horrible circumstances, that their strengths emerged. We don't know how strong someone is until they're under that type of pressure. I don't know who it was that said it, but they say about women, that a woman is like a tea bag. You don't know how strong she is until you put her in hot water. Now, and men, what about men? It's interesting, men say it's hot. It's too hot, I got to get out of here. The point is, it's an analogy. It's an analogy that you go into hot water, suddenly, like a tea bag, the strength. When you look at a tea bag, you have no clue. You have no clue what potency it has until it's in hot water. Like I said earlier with the olive being pressed, or the butterfly needing the pressure. Pressure and resistance is the key to all movement in life, frankly. What does energy consist of? Let's start with the energy of our own beings. The blood that's pumped from your heart, how is it pumped? What's a pump? Contraction, expansion. It's not just a flow. There's a pressure and there's a release. There's a tension and there's a resolution. Exhale and inhale. You see, look at water pressure. The energy that's generated by wind or generated by water. Where you really see the energy? Regular water flowing has some energy. You don't really see it. Build a dam. Build a powerful dam, and suddenly you see water build up, and then it has the power to release unbelievable amounts of energy. And the same thing is in anything in life. Your strength, only if there's resistance. If I put my hand up and you try to push it, and I'll keep stopping you, that's where your strength emerges. And the same thing psychologically and emotionally. You look through your life, you'll see, when did you discover a talent? When did you discover something about yourself? Often when there was a challenge, most cases. I remember for myself, just a personal example, I was in summer camp in Detroit, Michigan. And of course, in camp they have what's called color war. Color war, 2 teams, they divide the camp into 2 teams, and everybody, it's kids. And we compete. You compete with different plays, songs, athletics. There's a competition between 2 teams. One of the competitions that each team has to write a theme song. And the writer of the one in our team that was supposed to write the song suddenly had the flu. He's in the infirmary, can't write. So the general of the team comes over to me, and I was like, what was I, that age? 16 years old, I don't remember, or something like that. And he says to me, your father's a writer, why don't you write the song? I mean, since when? Just because your father's a writer doesn't mean I could write a song. But yeah, he was desperate. And I said to him, I never wrote a song, I know what you're talking about. I mean, in school I actually liked writing, but I was not, I didn't see myself as some writer. But a kid. He says, no choice, there's no one else. Sit down under a tree and go write a song. Okay, I had no choice. And so what I do, I hummed a tune to myself that I liked. And I sat under a tree exactly that. It was a beautiful day. And I began to write lyrics. I remember the first Mitzvaris of Green. That was my first opening line. So I wrote the lyrics of a song. Don't ask me to read it or sing it, because actually, looking back, I'm not so proud of it. It's somewhat childish, but relatively speaking. But actually, I think I once incorporated it in one of my articles. Because it has some nice lines. Nothing. I'm not going to win any awards for it. The point that I'm making here is that maybe you'll like it more than I do. Let's put it this way. But the bottom line is, I wrote the song. It was a song about actually prayer. I wrote about a person sitting in the woods and contemplating and pondering upon life, and learns to yearn, is looking for transcendence and yearning for something greater. It was a theme that struck me, and I used it and I incorporated it into words and a theme. We actually won the song. We beat the competition. But what was the cause of me writing? Because the guy fell into the infirmary. Had he not done that, I never would have written this song. I can't say I would never have become a writer after that. Maybe other things would have happened, mishaps. But I realized from that, when looking back, that when you start saying, when do you discover your talents? It's not like one day you wake up and you get a note from heaven and say, here's a list of your talents. And how many talents do you have right now that you are not even aware of, no matter how old you are? Because they don't just emerge. Something needs to compel you to. Now, obviously, there's certain talents that are easier to recognize. You could tell musical talent. But I know people until their 30s or 40s didn't even know they have a musical talent, for whatever reason. So there are so many things inside of us right now that remain dormant, asleep. And until there's a pressure, there's either no one else to do it, so you suddenly have to do it, or you feel something that you want to try it, and all kinds of things. It could even be an accident, so-called accident. But something that causes you to some resistance, and that causes you to achieve. Now, many of us are afraid. We're afraid of the competition. We're afraid to fail. So we don't try. That's one of the concerns. So when this mystic says, L'chatchila riba, that's his words, that in the first place, take a transcendent attitude, it's really not just about an attitude, it's about understanding yourself in a different way. How much true self-confidence do you have? The reason most of us deal with problems and difficulties in minimalistic ways is because we don't have the confidence, and we don't want to fail. Besides the fear of confrontation and now again, I'm not talking about cosmetic. I'm not talking about things that require short-term remedies, obviously, to go make a whole big issue of something that you can just correct with a Band-Aid, fine. I'm talking about specifically bigger issues. The reason many of us don't really tackle it on the root is not just the comfort zone that I referred to before, is because we don't see ourselves as capable. If you truly had a self-image that in your mind, and I'm not talking about delusions of grandeur, and I'm not talking about arrogance, I'm talking about a sense of confidence, that you truly are a transcendent creature, a transcendent being, and you do have meaning, and you do have purpose, then no impediment in the world will stand in your way. This doesn't mean you'll always get what you want, but you will not be afraid to encounter something, and you won't always go on the terms of the adversarial situation. That's the key here. You go above it. You take the high road. That's why I gave the example with the child. You see yourself, this is a child, he's kicking and scratching you. What, are you going to go down and stoop to his level or her level? Why? You're not on that level. Now let's say it's someone that's an adult, someone your own age, seem like a contemporary. But if you see them as a person who's either ignorant or short-sighted or just a short fuse, why would you allow it to get to you? Now, I'm not suggesting turning the other cheek to everything. Sometimes somebody says something, or somebody does something that deserves a response. But you have to think about it. How many of our mistakes do we make based on our impulsive reaction to something that we perceive as being an insult or some type of slight? That's why in Jewish thought you have a fascinating idea, which is like consistent with this idea of going over. If you know the Hebrew alphabet, there's a letter Hey. The letter Hey, which is the fifth letter of the alphabet, is structured. The Hebrew letters, besides the fact they all have meanings, they also have shapes. And their shapes tell us a story. Imagine the shape of a letter tells. So the Hey consists of, it looks like let's see here, what would be an English equivalent of a Hey? Well, think of it an upside down U. That would be like a Ches, right? So a U is what? Is a U? Well, a U is with a circle, actually. Is there anything like, do we have any letter that's a block letter? Well, think of a U, if you made a U as a square. without a top, right? The U. So a hey is like an upside down U, but it's interesting. I wish I could, does anyone have a piece of paper here? I'll make a diagram. That will be the best. It's easier to just draw it. Right here, if you don't mind, there's a piece of paper here, and I'll just give it to me, and I'll make a demonstration on the chair. And any one of those papers, I'll just do on the back side. Yeah, that's good. Thank you. Okay. So this is the letter Hey in Hebrew. I'll make it nice and big so everybody can see it. Can you see that? Yes? So you see a leg, a top, and a short leg here. Now there's another letter in Hebrew which looks very similar. I'll make it right below. And it's called a ches. See that? So these two are exactly the same, except this one has a space here and this one is enclosed. It's like a house, right? Got that? Okay. So it's just one example of the 22 Hebrew letters, and you'll see the significance in a moment. So the sages teach us that the three lines represent thought, speech, and action. Which means, thinking is the top leg, the top roof rather, and speech is this, and action is the short little leg here. Now the Hey is considered a healthy version of thought, speech, and action, and the Ches is considered an unhealthy version. I'll tell you why. Because obviously a healthy human being first thinks about something, then you speak, and then you act. You speak, you consult, you communicate, you review, and then you act. Between thought and speech and action, how much space should we leave? So in the Ches, there's no space. It just moves quickly. Someone thinks, speaks, and acts. In the Hey, before you act, you leave we'll call it a space, a pause. This is like a humble pause, which means that before you act on anything, you always pause and review it again. Think for a moment, how many mistakes would be avoided if you did that? So I'll give you a few examples. A telemarketer calls you, gets you on the phone. Today with caller ID, mostly doesn't happen, but it still once in a while happens. And they're very good at manipulating your emotions. So they tell you, hey, here's a product, you got to buy this. And they just know how to sell it to you. And you keep saying, well, I'm not sure. And if you tell them, call me back tomorrow, which really is just a way of procrastinating, it's hard to say no. They say no, the deal is over. If you don't buy it in half an hour, it's over. You always have those deadlines. It's all meant to basically force you to make a decision in haste once you're emotionally so-called manipulated and not to think about it too much. If you insist and say, listen, it's a nice thought, give me 24 hours, most cases they'll never call you back, but most cases you also won't buy a piece of garbage. Same thing as, let's say, someone I mentioned before humiliates you, or says something insults you, or says something that ticks you off. Very often we just react. Imagine if you were able to pause, this pause, and before you act on it and respond, you sleep on it. Take another example. Something distracts you, something seduces you. And even while you know it's seducing you, you know it's destructive. It's not good to do, but even though it's so powerful. And that could be any form of addiction, any form, something that really gets to you. For some people it's food, for some people it's gambling, it could be drugs and alcohol, it could be sex. There are many different things that people, and once you're in that moment of passion, it's so powerful that even if your mind tells you there are consequences, you some way minimize it, you ignore it, and so on. What would happen if you paused and you waited for a while for that passion to subside and say, you know what, if it's so good for me, why can't I sleep on it? And tomorrow morning I'll act on it. How many mistakes would be avoided in our lives if we had that attitude? Hundreds, most actually. Reflection is always the best way to deal with challenges. But very few of us reflect because the emotional power of something that's compelling you at this moment is more powerful than your need to reflect. even though it doesn't make sense, but that's how it is. So basically, we are driven very much by the here and now. This is the whole power of advertising. What's advertising? What is being beamed at you? What's being inundating us? They say by the time we're age 20, in the Western world, Western society, the average person has seen or heard 1 million advertisements. 1 million. Now, of course, there's no way that you bought 1 million products. And so it has to leave you with a certain sense of inadequacy. All this I've seen. And they're good advertisements. Wear this and you'll look like sexy. Drive this, dress this way, buy this, smoke that, travel there. And don't think advertising doesn't affect us. When I was younger, I thought advertising affects everybody but me. Then little did I realize that, they're not spending millions or billions of dollars to be ignored. So clearly advertising works. Coca-Cola, the number one brand in the world, attempted something a few years ago. They tried to not advertise in certain markets for a week. 1 week. And their sales fell. Now you think 1 week, Coca-Cola is already ingrained in our psyches. You can't eat a hot dog without Coca-Cola. From childhood on, it's like, how could you not have a Coke? All the different messages, subliminal messages. Because advertising works. It plays with our minds, it plants things, and it's, they say, for example, emails. You ignore a lot of emails, right? Spam and stuff like that. They say if you see an email over 18 times, you'll stop ignoring it. After 18 times, it begins to, you suddenly will open an email that you haven't opened. Why suddenly? Because something happens. It works on your brain or your heart or whatever it is. And suddenly you say, maybe I should look. Maybe there is something there. That's why all these campaigns, obviously, you usually unsubscribe before the 18 times or whatever it may be. But these are methodologies that work. They play with us. Because we are human beings, we are fickle, and we could be persuaded. The point I want to make with all of this, so obviously when we apply this same principle to things like dealing with problems, we're always going to look for the short term. So the statement that this Rebbe made, this mystic made, that instead of, if you can't go under, go over, and I say go over in the first place, he's really saying it's not just a method of how to solve a problem, it's a method of how to look at yourself. Are you a transcendent human being? Or are you what's the opposite of transcendent? How can I call it? An existential maybe? I don't know if that word existential is right here. Are you a human being that's shaped and defined by the circumstances of your life? Let's put it that way. Are you a product, I don't want to say victim, a product of your circumstances? Or are you the shaper of your circumstances? These are very, very two different things. Most people see themselves as somewhat victims or products of their circumstances. What should I do? These are the parents I had. What should I do? This is the schools I went to. This is what society taught. This is what I see on TV. I don't have other options. That's the language, that's the voice that many of us have, which is, I want to call it fatalistic, a certain element of resignation, a certain element of, what am I supposed to do? What choices? What options do I have? Which really means, if I can translate it, it means that I don't believe that I have something stronger than that which was given to me. So if my parents didn't give me an opportunity, or they gave me negative messages, or they gave me a sense of lack, did not nurture my self-confidence, that's who I am. Many people will see themselves damaged goods, sense of low self-esteem, and therefore the fears and the insecurities of every given situation. Hard to make decisions because you second-guess yourself, etc., etc. Sounds a little familiar? Hope none of you deal with this, but I'm sure you know a few people on this earth that deal with these issues. And we all have measure of it. Comes the Rebbe Marash and says, his birthday was yesterday, he says, there's another approach. If you really understand yourself in a new way, you are a transcendent human being. And this is before Viktor Frankl. We're talking about the 19th century. That if you yourself see yourself, I'll use a biblical term, as created in the divine image, and God placed you here with a personal plan. I put you here on this earth as my agent and my ambassador, and you define your destiny, and I've given you all the resources you need. That doesn't mean you don't have challenges. It doesn't mean you didn't grow up in this home. It doesn't mean you have these and these challenging disadvantages. We all have challenges. However, you see this all the time. You see some people say, if I grew up in wealth, I'd be the happiest person. Yeah, well, you know something? There are many people who are very wealthy and very miserable. And there are very many people who have no wealth and they're very happy. It has nothing to do with your circumstances. As Viktor Frankl showed, it has to do with who you see yourself as. Yes, obviously wealth makes life a little easier and comfortable, but that doesn't guarantee happiness. As a matter of fact, many wealthy people are extremely miserable and extremely lonely because they see themselves through the lens of money, and they see others see them through the lens of money. I met an individual who grew up in a more or less poverty home. His father was a school teacher, and then God blessed him, and now he's a multimillionaire in the hundreds of millions, maybe more. And I talked to him. I spent a Shabbos with him at a weekend retreat, and we hit it off. We were speaking. He said, and suddenly out of nowhere, he says to me, "I'm a very lonely man today. I had a lot of friends before I gained wealth. I said, today I don't know. I don't know if someone's coming to speak to me because they want my money, because I have money. I lost my friends," he says. "Even the people that we were like child friends, everything is now tainted. Everything is jaded." And I looked at him, and it was interesting. He was not complaining. He's still very blessed, and he's happy in that sense. But I saw a person who's intelligent enough to understand that. Some people get wealthy, and they really think they're better people. That's why everybody wants to speak to them, because they're really brilliant. They don't want my money, they want my advice. Well, that's delusional. Not everybody that has money means they can give you advice. Just because they made money doesn't mean they're wiser. It means God bless them, so be it, and God bless everyone. But I see from that it really has nothing to do with what you have. It has to do with who you are. And you enter the right way, then whatever happens in your life, you know how to deal with it. I see people who've gained a lot of wealth and became arrogant. They think they're really better. They really think that their sense of entitlement. And I see people who were blessed that way and retain their humility, and they retain their real sense of themselves. It's not as easy because there is challenges, but it has to do all with the personality and character before these events happen. Just like you cannot tell which tree is stronger in the woods, in the forest, until the storm strikes. When the storm strikes, you suddenly see which tree remains standing and which one's full. The same thing is in life. Who you are is defined not by what happens to you. And unfortunately, when someone asks you, "Who are you?" most of us give their business cards. "Who are you? Here's my business card." Try it out. I've tested this. But the business card tells you what you do. It doesn't say who you are. As a matter of fact, who are you? You may not even be able to define who you are. Because many people, what they're doing is not who they are. Statistics show that most of us don't even like our jobs, what we're doing. Some of us learn to adjust, some of us to learn, it grows on us, we learn to like it. There's the rare commodity, the rare person that is doing something they really love and would do it naturally because that's where their talents are. Many people say, "What are you talking about? I'm doing this because I couldn't get a job in music or in art. Nobody values it." So what you have is a dissonance between who you are and what you do. So in this statement of how to deal with a problem, it comes down to how the real question should be rephrased. How do you see yourself? If you see yourself as a winner, like Sun Tzu puts it in The Art of War, he says winning battles don't happen during the battles, they happen before the battles. You win a war before the war begins. Sounds odd, right? How is that possible? Because it's attitude. You win a war in your mind, you're a winner, and then you go and you clean it up. So it's all about attitude. Look at the biggest lesson in life in this matter. Take the Vietnam War in the 60s in the United States of America. United States, no question, the strongest army in history probably. Definitely stronger than the bamboo-wielding Vietnamese. And I don't mean to be demeaning. I mean, it's not even a third world country, comparatively speaking. And yet, who won the war? The United States, with all its firepower, with all its military, did not win the war. And even though in the beginning America was for the war, the early 60s, late 50s, mid-60s, it became clear that the United States public was against the war, and finally it ended. We had to pull out and so on. What was the reason? And there's students of history that say, how is that possible? A little country like that. So the main reason, frankly, was very simple, going back to purpose and meaning. You would ask the average person in the U.S. military, Why are we fighting this war? They had no clue. At best someone could say some theory developed in the late 50s called the domino effect, which was that the communists were spreading in different places in Eastern Europe, but also in Southeast Asia. And just like Korea, and now Vietnam, and the next thing will be Cambodia, and then whatever, the next countries, and then next thing you know, communism will control the world. So we have to put a stop to it in Vietnam. That's the reason, by the way. Most people have no clue that's even the reason. But even if you know that, how many soldiers knew that? How many people in the military knew it? And even if they knew it, who had passion for that? Well, what do I really care whether this Vietnamese is Soviet or not Soviet? On the other hand, the Vietnamese fighting, the Viet Cong, this was their heart and soul. This was their rice paddies. It was their baby. And when you fight for your baby, it's very, very different than when you fight for some cause thousands of miles away that's so ideological or so vague that nobody knows what you're fighting for. So you can have the largest army lose to the weakest army when you have passion, when you have cause. Just a small example. I mean, I'm sure there's more. I'm not trying to be overly simplistic. I remember, I think I mentioned this once here. I was in summer camp, talking about summer camp. I don't know why I'm remembering summer camp so I'm getting this nostalgia. As they say, nostalgia is not what it used to be, So I was in summer camp, and I remember first day in camp, and we all get to know each other, who's in the bunk, and one arrogant little twerp, I'll use a different word, but okay, when we all laid out opened up our luggage and unpacking, so you don't do this with kids. Over his bed, he put up a bunch of his plaques of all his awards. You don't really do this in a bunk in camp, And one of them was he was a chess champion, some junior chess champion in his community. So everybody, of course, was ticked off by this arrogant little guy. He thinks he's some type of this, and he's ready. We saw who we're going to deal with this whole summer. So, and I was one of them. I decided in an immature way, I must say, we got to put him in his place. Okay. So, kids have ways to put their friends in place. So I decided I'm going to psych this guy out. And, he's a chess champion. Now, I play chess decent. I can't say, nothing special, but I can play a decent game fine. So I started working on him from day one. I said to him, I see you're a champion, but, who did you play already? Did you really play anybody really good? He says, yeah, I played the best, blah, blah, blah. I said, no, I don't think you played the best. And I had some other kids also plant the seed that I'm a very good chess player. And finally he kept on he saw, I said to him, I don't think I even give you the dignity of playing me, that type of thing. It was complete BS. I was just psyching him out. And anyway, I built up this his will, as competitive juices flowing, to really want to take me on. So I said, look, I don't want to embarrass you. I don't want to humiliate you. I'm not I don't want to hustle you. But I kept on this, and he says, no, you play me. I said, look, if you lose, I know the rest of your summer is going to be destroyed. I don't want to do that to you. Whatever. Anyway, you get the idea. So the more I resisted, the more he wanted to play me. And the more he was convinced that I must be great because, it was like, I didn't even challenge him. On the contrary, I was giving him the so-called, I was bestowing upon him benevolence to play with him. Anyway, we sit down to play the game. The guy was a lot better than I can tell you that without a question. And because he was so convinced that I'm better, it's like a poker. He was convinced I had the better hand, and he was convinced, and I was it took a week that he really was, he thought he's playing the best chess player on earth, And we're sitting down, and the first moves are relatively easy. We start getting into the middle of the game, and I made some moves, I would tell you, no particular, but he thought I was so brilliant. He read into my moves. I remember him we had time limit, but he kept on looking into the moves, what kind of move was that? He says, where'd you get that? Is that 1864 of, Chasky versus Schmenz, whatever, So I said, I'm not telling you my secret methods, I'm not giving you, I kept on building it up. And he lost because he made some stupid moves because he thought my moves were significant and they weren't. They were just, a move I made. And he read into it, and he got himself all messed up, and within another 5-6 moves, it was chessmate. And I remember vividly, and I never told him. was humiliated, and trust me, he was much better than I, no question. But here's a perfect example. It has nothing to do with what you have. It has to do with what everybody thinks you have. And today I look back and I feel a little bad that I did it, but maybe it's a lesson in life. The point I'm making here is there's attitude. Now, of course, the next question everyone would ask is, okay, so how do you gain this attitude? Let's say I don't have it. I don't see myself as a winner. I see myself as a loser, or at least mediocre, or average, or whatever it is. So this answer to this is a very straightforward one, but this is the long, short road. The long, short road is you need to learn about yourself and discover what you're capable of. And more specifically, you need to learn about your soul, your capacities. And the more you know about what you're like and capable of, the more confidence you gain. That's number one. Second thing is you need to be around people that have that sense of self. Because there's a contagious element to it. It does rub off. You hang around people who are not confident or low self-esteem, with all due respect to them, it's not going to help you in your self-esteem. Because then, you know, it's like what I said, misery loves company. Then, you know, mediocrity loves mediocrity. There was this guy who went to training, he wanted to become a paratrooper. Okay, so he goes up there, and the paratroopers up in the plane. And the way it goes is, you know, for a few weeks, you help out and you watch how others do it. You learn the technique until comes your turn, and they pack you up. So that's what he did. He helped out. He packed people up, blah, blah, you know, prepared. Watched how they jumped, the methods. And that builds up the courage. Fine. Okay, his day comes. 3 weeks pass, a month pass. It's your turn, Charlie. Right? Charlie gets on line, and he's excited. And he's all packed up with his parachute. Everyone's jumping. He's about to jump. He looks down. Oh, no, 1 second. I'm not jumping so fast. 30,000 feet. You know, that's too scary, you know. Okay, fine. We have that too. We need another month of psychological preparation. Fine. Another month passes. He's helping and everything. Again, the day comes and he's again excited. Same thing happens. He looks down. Hey, I can't jump. Okay, so the sergeant tells him, listen, Charlie, you're clearly not made out to be a paratrooper. You know, you should enlist another part of the military. You don't have to be, you know, do something else. You don't have to do this. There's other jobs. There's other positions. He says, no, I really love it up here. I really love it. I'll help out. I'll help back up. I'll make them lunch. I'll do everything, you know. He says, but you're never going to jump. He says, look, I may never jump, but I like to be around people who jump, you know. So that's like, you know, I like to be around people who have courage. I don't know if you ever read The Red Badge of Courage. It's own stuff. I think Conrad wrote that. Who wrote that? I forgot already. Huh?
Joseph Conrad.
Right, Joseph Conrad. So he likes to be around people with courage. Obviously, I'm not addressing. There's something about being around people that actually builds up courage, and I think those are the two key items that are necessary to build this transcendent attitude. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it could begin tonight for all of us. And that is, you have to make a strong commitment to yourself. You must find out what you're capable of and not buy into what you think you are. Who is it? I think it was Henry Kissinger wrote his memoirs. So he writes the night that Richard Nixon resigned in 1973, only president to resign, Watergate, the whole thing. So he said that night, when Nixon was already forced and he knew he had to sign resignation papers. So before he actually announced the resignation, he asked Kissinger to come to his private study, and he asked Kissinger to get down on his knees, Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger, to pray. He said, Henry, let's pray together. Fine. Henry Kissinger was Jewish, of course, but Richard Nixon taught him how to pray. They get up from their knees and they walk out of the room, and so you go out to the main antechamber, the main hall in the White House. There's this big portrait of JFK. He's like in a very pensive position. He's sitting on a chair with his hands on his chin. It's like bent down. It's a famous portrait made by one of the, I forgot who it was, a famous artist in that period. And, you know, JFK in his all glory, looking beautiful, handsome, Camelot. And Kissinger writes that he heard Nixon standing in front of the portrait. This is as they're walking down to announce the resignation. You know, so it's one of his low points in his life. And he says to the portrait, you know, mutters to JFK, like as he's talking to him, he says to him, they love you, meaning the country loves you, because you remind them of who they want to be. But they hate me because I remind them of who they are. That's what Nixon said. So I think it's a very interesting insight. We love people who remind us of what we want to be. And we hate people who remind us of who we are. And the question really is, who are we? And the image that many of us have is not necessarily an accurate one. It's an image that may be a product of our parents' attitudes and expectations, or lack of expectations. It may be a product of our education, of society, of what we see on television and the internet, what's beamed and projected into our lives all the time. And that really becomes the so-called template, or that we project on. This is how we project ourselves. How accurate is it? What happens one day you find out that you have a very inaccurate picture of yourself? I'm not suggesting we don't know anything about ourselves, obviously, but I'm talking about if you were in an environment where you had to initiate and not wait for anyone else, not react to anything, you have to be proactive, how would you behave? Well, my father was a journalist, so in journalism they say there are three types of people. People who make things happen, people who watch things happen, and people ask, what happened? Which one are you? When you go to a party, do you gravitate to people you know or to people you don't know? Answer these questions in your own privacy. You don't have to answer them to anyone but yourself. These are certain signs that will teach you about your proactive abilities. Unfortunately, not due to our own choice, we've been subject, as much as this world is very technologically advanced, we are mostly followers. You know, how we dress, how we even think, how we talk, is based on cultural elements. Now, I'm not suggesting we should be an island and not be influenced, obviously, by our communities, by our friends, by our peers, obviously, but the question is, what is left? How much self is there? And this is the challenge each of us has. No matter where you are in life, obviously the earlier in life you catch this, the better it is. But no matter where you are, you can always review this. Now, I tell you right now, it's not comfortable. It's not comfortable to find out that you are not exactly who you think you are. And many of us are on the merry-go-round. We're already traveling at 90 miles an hour, meaning the routines and patterns of our lives. Not so simple to just stop and say, okay, 1 second. We are now products of our routines. Let's be honest. Tomorrow morning, as much as you may be inspired by these words or not inspired, tomorrow morning you got to get up and go to work, or whatever your obligations or responsibilities are, and you can't stop that. So you may here and there get a refreshing thought or idea, but you are already on a merry-go-round. You're not a impressionable young child who's just beginning the journey. We already have our hard drives are full. I mean our minds and hearts. We've been shaped, we have frameworks, we have perspectives, we have biases and prejudices. The list goes on. But at the end of the day, you still have something inside of you that is not created by any human being, and that's your soul. And that means if you access it, you can, in some ways, free yourself, even from the routines and the bonds of your life. Now, I'm not suggesting cold turkey. We're not talking about suddenly stopping everything you do. That's rarely possible. And this may not even be suggestible, not advisable, because you're not looking to disrupt your life. We're not talking about some type of like a total amputation. But in a slower way, where you dedicate, let's say you designate, in the morning you wake up, there's a powerful prayer. I acknowledge you for returning my soul to me. So it's quality time that when you wake up, when you're just beginning your fresh new day, you're acknowledging that there's a force inside of you that's more than the sum of your parts. That's more than the activities that you're involved in. And before you go to sleep, I always suggest this. Instead of going to sleep with a newspaper in your nose or the television on, read something poetic, something soulful, something that speaks to your heart and soul. So when you go into this mysterious place called sleep, and you awake from this mysterious place called sleep, at least you're going in and leaving it with waking up from it and going to sleep into it, and going and entering into it with something pure that's not of the anxieties of the day. Something fresh. And these are not difficult things to do. It's going to be difficult to implement initially, But I want it to become a routine just like you brush your teeth every morning. So it takes a few times to do it to become a habit. The first few days will be difficult. But if you're committed to it, you won't be surprised what kind of fruits, what kind of results will come from just these few moments. Because what happens is then it starts working on you. And then throughout the day, you start looking for different ways to access this thing I'm calling the soul. And that's how you become a more transcendent human being. Not just escapism on weekends or evenings when you're reading a transcendent book, or you're like art or music or romance or spirituality. It becomes something that you want it to become part of your regular routine, because that's the real transcendence that you want, not the compartmentalized version. And then, yes, then you learn to start looking at things. How do I go over instead of under? Initially, you don't then engage in battles. You prevent in the first place because you are a transcendent person. You start realizing that you build an immunity to pettiness, to superficiality, Someone told me the other day, he talked about road rage. He cut off someone on the highway. So of course there's that anger that people experience. It's itself an interesting study in human nature. In this case, the guy followed him for 6 miles till he went off his exit. He went to an ATM machine, and the guy that he cut off 6 miles back, a half hour ago, followed him, comes into the bank, and starts punching him because he cut him off. The guy didn't even know why. Why are you punching me? He says, you cut me off, blah, 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 blah. So of course he told him, get a life. So he started punching him more. But thank God there were police there, so it didn't work. But you start thinking, why, how do we, all of us have times that we get this type of anger at something that's so completely petty, meaningless. So is it because we just don't have any higher so-called aspirations? So then these little things bother us? Well, I would say all of us are capable of sometimes stooping to that level. It's the equivalent of scratching and kicking the little child that I mentioned. What happens when you begin to recognize that so-called sublime and elevated, refined state, refined being that you really are, which is your soul, things become less significant. So it's not like problems go away. What happens is the problem is not as big. As I mentioned in the strongest terms, as Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust was horrible. People lost entire families. And yet they had the resilience, not because they suffered less, but because in some way they had that little edge that there's still a destination to reach. We're still on a journey. We will not be consumed by our suffering. Or another way to put it is, you can suffer, but doesn't mean you become a sufferer. You don't personalize the experience that suddenly you identify. Many people, when something happens to them, they think that became them. It happened to you. It didn't become you. You're not shaped, you're not defined by what happens to you. You may be affected by it. It may hurt you. It may in some other way impact you. But why are you being defined by it? That means that your own identity is yet to be defined. So you become defined by things that happen to you. Like I said before, many people define who they are by what they do. And some people define who they are by what happened to them. But it happened to you. There's a you that's outside of what happened to you. Now, this is not just a pep talk, because you can't just tell somebody who feels that way, hey, it's not you. The only way is to teach them how to find the you that they have not yet discovered. And that's the idea of understanding what this expression I said, to solve a problem in a new way. Now, in this week's Torah chapter, interestingly, captures the same theme. It starts off, Kadoshim Tiyu, you shall be sanctified. You shall be sacred people. And then the verse continues. Why? Because I, God, am sacred. There you have it right there. What is sanctity? We hear about, for example, morality, ethics. What does it mean to be sacred? What does it mean to be holy? Is that anything more than moral? And the answer is yes. To be moral is obviously a beautiful virtue. But to be sacred means that you become something more than human. Morality is still in the human domain. Sanctity is in the divine domain. Like I, God, am sacred. What does that mean? I am not part and parcel of creation in a way. which means you're not just what you experience. The reason mortals or human beings define themselves by their experiences is because of our limitations. But if you were to find out that you have a part of God inside of you, that you are in some way divine, sacred, then you're completely of a different material. You're not made of the material of this world. Some people put it this way: we're not physical beings going on a spiritual journey, traveling on a spiritual journey. We're spiritual beings traveling on a physical journey. So how do you see yourself? As a body that happens to have a soul, or as a soul that happens to be traveling through a body? For most people, it's the former. Because that's what we know most. What our five senses experience, what we see, what we hear, what we taste, touch, and smell. That idea that we are of a different material, not made of the mortality and the what's the word I want to use, the impermanence of this material world, is something that we need to connect to. Now, all of us sense that there's something in life that's more than just the here and now. I would say almost nobody does not sense. I mentioned before the birth of a child, other magical experiences or wonders or awe that we experience, that we sense there's something more. But we only sense it. We still live in this world and we sense something out there. Imagine you came to discover that what's out there is the real thing and what you're experiencing is just a very superficial side. It's a very different approach. And I usually describe it in a, not in a positive way, but when people ask, where does the soul go to upon death? And this question is asked constantly. What happened to my father, my mother? Where does the soul go to? And I've been answering this question for years until one day, years ago, I had an epiphany. And I realized the whole question, talk about symptoms and roots, is based on the wrong symptomatic approach, which is, the question is based on assumption, I am where it's at, so you wonder, where does the soul go to? But maybe you're not where it's at. So I developed this, I guess, almost ridiculous, humorous metaphor, analogy, think of an imaginary conversation between a refrigerator and electricity. And the refrigerator says to the electricity, where do you go to when they pull the plug? And of course the electricity incredulously responds, what kind of chutzpah, what kind of nerve is that? What do you mean where I go to? You're a little box called a refrigerator that they just invented the last 100 or 200 years ago. And now you think you're the center of the universe. All you are is a little box that when my energy enters into you, you have the machinery and the devices to refrigerate food. And now you think you're the same. You ask me where I go? Where'd you come from? You're the novelty. I've always been around. I go back to my natural place that's beyond time and space, and you'll never understand it because all you are is a box. Now, everyone hears this analogy, of course. So the body, we ask, where does the soul go to? We're a little box. The body is a little box that has a very small little myopic glimpse of existence. It's like someone standing in a deep pit and asks, where's the horizon? You're not going to see the horizon when you're in a little pit. You got to climb a mountain, and you climb higher. You climb, you see, wow, that horizon is pretty big. And the higher you go, you realize even more. The more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know. So the box is going to define reality. You know, when we say, where does the soul go to? The soul goes back to its place that's beyond time and space as we know it, beyond the capacity of a little box to understand things. The box being the way we perceive life. When you begin to think this way, you suddenly open up new vistas and new opportunities. Because then you're not looking from a pit, you're looking from the top of the mountain. You say, wow, this is a horizon. Your life becomes defined and informed by a bigger picture. It's like someone who sees the big picture that informs the small picture. Or you live your life frame by frame. Kierkegaard said, you can only understand your life backwards, but you have to live your life frontwards. Because think about frames in a film. Every moment in our lives is a frame. Right now is a frame. Tomorrow will be another frame. Next day. We don't know the frames that are coming. And we live in the moments. When in truth there's a far bigger story, let's call it a hidden choreography. And that's only capable of being appreciated when you connect to that soulful part of yourself. And then you become a true transcendent person. And then when there are problems and difficulties, you address them very differently. You're not looking to work based on the terms of life and survival mode and existence. You call the shots. It's a soul figuring out how to maneuver in a material world instead of a body trying to figure out how to manage due to all these challenges and difficulties. It's a completely different attitude. Now we all can understand this. The question now is implementing it. And implementing, really, there are no shortcuts, my friends. It comes down to commitment. You create the space for it. You commit on a daily basis, whether it's a morning prayer, it's a little study once a week. Commitment means not cramming it. It means small steps, like the power of the drop of water. A drop by drop by drop. That's how you build. Much, much more effective to have a drop each day than to just drink gallons once a month or something. Because that's how it grows. Just like raindrops. Raindrops on the ground. If it came flooding down, it would flood the fields. Right? But if it comes down drop by drop, it's absorbed, more is absorbed, and slowly things begin to emerge. So this is the central theme of both the chapter and also of this birthday that I mentioned, yesterday's birthday. Today you could be sacred. You could be something greater than what is human, what is humanly possible. And it's not just a miracle, it's because you have it inside of you. To conclude with Michelangelo's powerful line when they asked him, how do you carve these beautiful angels in the marble? And he says, I see the angels trapped in the marble and I carve and set them free. So nothing has to be given to you. It's all inside of you. You just have to carve. It's trapped in marble and concrete, in other substances, in the life that you're living, the routines. Life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. That type of thing. All those the means become more powerful than the end. So your means define you. When in truth there's an angel, there's a flower, there's a music, any metaphor you like, that's trapped inside of you and waiting to be released. Instead of it being held hostage by our material lives and our so-called day-to-day responsibilities. And as I said, the practical way to begin is something in the morning, something in the evening, something in the middle of the day that reminds you. It's like signposts. And today, it's not that difficult. Today, you can do it through the internet. There are many opportunities. I'll just give you one example, which is something we offer. It's a free app called My Omer. Now that we're in the 49 days between Passover and Shavuot, so each day is actually a day of, it's like 49 days of character refinement. So each day is based on a mystical energy, which is a personal attribute that each of us has, going from chesed, love, discipline. It's really the spectrum of human emotions, and each day has a certain meditation and exercise. Literally 10 lines, not even 10 lines, 8 lines. So just sign up for the My Omer app, and you'll see it'll come to you. You could write down what time you want it to remind you. So like a daily little exercise. There's one example of many. You could also get a daily email that we send out. And you could just My Omer, both for Android and for iOS, to give you all the details. You can go to meaningfullife.com, our website, and you have there a lot of resources. A lot of resources that can help you. Because we live in a world that needs constant signposts and reminders. It's like traveling a road in the dark. You need something to illuminate. And the more you do it, the more the benefits. And try it out. Whatever investment you make, you'll get far more in return. So forget about whether yesterday, 2 days ago, 5 years ago. Life always begins from this moment on, the present. What you're going to do from here going forward. You're not a victim of yesterday and the past. It all comes down to, can you take control of your life? And start slow, because anything more, if you take on too much, it becomes too difficult. Slowly, something you can manage. And no doubt that it will yield fruit and results. So it's always an honor to share a few words with you. Hopefully this will be a catalyst to ignite more of your own initiatives, because we have what takes them within us. And please see me and the Meaningful Life Center as a ongoing living resource to help you in any way, as friends or anything else we can offer, writings, a lot of stuff online, classes, different programs. And anything we can do to help you, please let us know. It's always a great, as I said, honor to intersect with kindred spirits, we're all on this journey, and every time we interact, it's a way of like a connection made between in this larger choreography I was referring to, this big mosaic, and hopefully we all can help each other play our musical note and create this grand cosmic symphony. So thank you, everyone. Every Wednesday we're here from around 8:15 till approximately 9:45 or 10ish, depending on how things flow. And if you have not left me your email address, please do.
Scattamo stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Gira musica, gira e non si ferma, come una galla do vento a itta. Attira con narina, tamburello e abbacia come sua figliola. Scattano stanotti, viri come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla. Sinni e tunu, i voti si danno, tuna poco gli bevuti. Sin d'affettunu, i cappotti russi e si ricordano da notti buona. Scattamo stanotti, vini come balla, sutta e fanali chi si scidica. Ballamo stanotti, salta come un'anna, chi pettini di luna in sciolla.